Speak up, guys. Today we have an unbelievable story that you can't miss. We will tell the impressive story of Roldan Castillo, who survived a lightning strike, faced a terrifying demon, and discovered a secret conspiracy in the heart of Miami. It's a story of overcoming and mystery that will move you. Before we start, comment here which city you are from, because I want to know where this story will go. And of course, if you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, do so now, so you don't miss any of our incredible stories. Let's go. My name is Roldan Castillo, and my story begins in Miami, Florida, where I was born to Cuban immigrants who came to the United States in search of a better life. I grew up in a world divided between the vibrant culture of my family and the fast-paced, pragmatic reality of Miami. I have always been a skeptical person, with my feet firmly on the ground. But all that changed in one day that completely transformed my view of the world and my place in it. I never believed that something supernatural could happen to me. I grew up listening to my mother's stories about spirits, angels, and demons, but I always thought they were just legends, tales to scare children. My father was the pillar of our family, a hard-working and honest man who had a small store in the city center. When he died, I was just 10 years old, and this loss shook our family. My mother, Maria, took control of the store and worked hard to support us. She was always a woman of unshakable faith, but I, on the other hand, turned away from everything that could not be explained by reason. It was on a cloudy day, while I was playing football in the backyard, that my life changed forever. Lightning struck me, and in that instant I was launched on a journey that not only revealed secrets from beyond, but also put everything I loved at risk. This is the story of how a near-death experience left me facing demons real and figurative, and how my mother's love and faith ended up becoming my greatest protection. As I tell this story, I want you to understand that I am not a person who easily believes in supernatural things. I've always been skeptical. I've always looked for logical explanations for everything. But what happened to me that day defied everything I believed possible. It was an experience that changed me profoundly, that made me question everything I thought I knew about life and death. I don't expect you to believe everything I'm going to tell you. In fact, if you had told me this story a few years ago, I probably would have doubted it. But I ask that you listen with an open mind. Because even if you don't believe everything, I hope my story can make you think about the things we can't explain, about the possibility that there is more to this world than we can see or touch. Growing up in Miami was like living in a melting pot. The streets were full of life, with people speaking Spanish, English, and a mixture of the two. The smell of Cuban coffee and the beats of salsa were as common as the noise of traffic. My childhood was simple, but full of happy moments. I remember well the nights we would get together for family dinner. My dad always arrived with a smile on his face, no matter how tired he was after a long day at the store. He talked about his work, about the clients he had met, and he always ended up dreaming out loud about the future we would have. One day, he said, "We're going to have a chain of stores all over Florida." My mother listened with a gentle smile, sometimes shaking her head as if to say, "Here he comes with his dreams again." But I could see the love and pride in her eyes. My mother, Maria, was the heart of our home. With her soft voice and full of wisdom, she always found a way to turn any difficult situation into a life lesson. I remember once when I was about 8 years old, I accidentally broke a vase that she loved. Instead of scolding me, she sat me down and explained to me how sometimes things break, but that doesn't mean love ends. She taught me how to fix the vase with glue and a little patience. "See," she said when we finished. "Now he has a story to tell." But our life suddenly changed when my father fell ill. It was as if a dark cloud had settled over our house. Visits to the hospital became frequent, and I remember sitting in the waiting room listening to the doctors speak to my mother in terms I didn't understand. What I understood was the expression on her face, concern mixed with a fierce determination not to let fear show in front of her son. When my father finally passed away, I felt like the ground had been ripped out from under my feet. Sadness took over our home, like an unwanted guest that refused to leave. But my mother, even immersed in pain, never lost her strength. She took over the store, took care of me, and did everything she could to make sure we didn't lack for anything. I grew up watching my mother's efforts to keep our family together and our small store running. She was a woman of unshakable faith, always praying and believing that things would get better. I admired her strength, but at the same time, I couldn't understand how she could believe so firmly in something she couldn't see or touch. I, on the other hand, immersed myself in my work as a photographer. It was my way of escaping the pain and feeling of helplessness that had haunted me since my father's death. Through the lens of my camera, I could control what I saw. I could capture moments of beauty in a world that often seemed cruel and meaningless. It was in this context, with these experiences shaping who I was, that the fateful day arrived. The day a lightning strike changed everything. The day I was forced to face a world that went far beyond what my camera could capture. That day started like any other. But there was something in the air, a tension that I couldn't explain. The sky was covered in dark clouds, and a cold breeze was blowing, making the leaves on the trees dance in an almost menacing way. I should have paid more attention to these signs, but at the time, I didn't pay much attention. I decided to play a little football in the backyard, something that always helped me clear my head when things got too much. The lawn was a little damp from the previous night's rain, and the smell of wet earth filled the air. I remember running after the ball, completely focused on the game, trying to forget for a few moments all the worries I was carrying. That's when it happened. Suddenly, a blinding light took over everything around me. It was so intense that for a moment I thought the sun had exploded. There was no time to think, to run, to do anything. In the next instant, I felt excruciating pain course through my entire body. It was as if every cell, every fiber of my being was being ripped from the inside out. The world around me disappeared. There was no more yard, there was no more sky. There was nothing more but that overwhelming pain and a feeling of endless falling. It was as if I were falling into a bottomless abyss, spinning and spinning without control. And then, as suddenly as it started, everything stopped. The pain was gone, the feeling of falling disappeared, and I found myself floating above my own body. It was the strangest and scariest thing I have ever experienced. I could see everything around me with incredible clarity, but I couldn't move or speak. It was as if I were an invisible observer, trapped in a place between life and death. I saw my body lying on the lawn, motionless. The surrounding grass was singed, forming a strange pattern that spread out from the point where I had been hit. The air still smelled of ozone, that characteristic smell that lingers in the air after a storm. It was then that I saw my mother running towards me. She must have heard the clap of thunder or seen the flash of light through the window. The desperation in his eyes broke my heart. I wanted to scream, to say that I was okay, that in some strange way I was still there, but I could do nothing but watch helplessly as she knelt beside my body. "Roldan, my son," she screamed, her voice choked with fear and anguish. Her hands shook as she touched my face, looking for signs of life. "Please, please don't leave me," she pleaded, alternating between Spanish and English in her desperation. Seeing my mother in that state of pure terror and helplessness was one of the hardest things I have ever experienced. I wanted to comfort her, to tell her that somehow I was still there, that she wasn't alone, but all I could do was watch, stuck in that state between worlds, unable to reach her. As this was happening, I began to notice that something else was changing around me. The world began to become brighter, more ethereal. It was as if a fog was lifting, revealing a reality that had always been there but that I had never been able to see before. It was at that moment that I realized I wasn't just having a strange experience after being struck by lightning. I was on the brink of death, hovering between this world and the next. And what came next would forever change my understanding of life, death, and everything that exists beyond what we can see. As I floated, feeling increasingly light and distant from my body, A sense of panic began to rise within me. It was like I was being pulled away from everything I knew, everything I loved. The world around me began to change. The colors became more intense, and the sounds were different. I could hear whispers, distant voices that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at the same time. It was then that I realized I wasn't alone. A sinister presence began to manifest itself. At first, it was just a feeling, a chill down my spine that didn't make sense considering I no longer had a physical body. But soon, this presence began to take shape. A dark figure began to materialize in front of me. It was a demonic entity, there is no other way to describe it. His form was shrouded in shadows that seemed to move and undulate as if they had a life of their own. It had enormous black wings that extended to the sides, so vast that they seemed to swallow all the light around it. But what terrified me most were his eyes. Red eyes that glowed with such intense malice that I could almost feel the hatred emanating from them. Terror gripped me in a way I had never experienced before. It was a primordial, visceral fear that went beyond anything I had ever felt in life. I realized that I was completely defenseless. I had no body to fight, no voice to scream for help. I was at the mercy of that terrible creature, and the realization of this made me feel such profound despair that I thought I would tear myself apart. The creature advanced towards me, and I felt a deadly cold envelop my being. It was like all the hope, all the joy, all the love I had ever felt was being sucked away. In that moment, I understood what it meant to be truly lost. I closed my eyes, or at least I had the sensation of closing them, since I no longer had a physical body, expecting the worst. It was then that something incredible happened. An intense light appeared, so bright that it could penetrate even through my closed eyelids. When I opened my eyes again, I saw that the light was dispelling the shadows around me. An angel had appeared between me and the devil. Its wings were golden and shone with a light of its own. An aura of protection surrounded him, and I could feel the power and kindness emanating from him. Without saying a word, the angel wrapped me in his arms, and at that moment, an indescribable peace came over me. It was as if all the fear, all the anguish, all the pain had been washed away from me. I felt safe, protected, as if nothing could hurt me while I was under the protection of that celestial being. The demon retreated, hissing in anger, but unable to approach the angel's light. At that moment, I understood that there was much more to the universe than I had ever imagined. There were forces of good and evil in constant conflict, and somehow, I had found myself in the middle of this cosmic battle. The experience was both terrifying and enlightening. I realized that my view of the world had been too limited. I had rejected everything that could not be explained by science. But now I was face to face with a reality that went far beyond my previous understanding. It was as if a veil had been lifted, allowing me to glimpse the mysteries of the universe. As the angel guided me away from that dark place, I began to understand that my journey was just beginning. There was so much more to learn, so much more to experience. And although I was still scared and confused, I felt a growing curiosity about what would come next. The angel guided me through a tunnel of light. It was an indescribable sensation, as if we were traveling through the very fabric of the universe. The colors around us were more vibrant than anything I had ever seen on Earth, and there was soft, harmonious music that seemed to come from all directions. When we reached the end of the tunnel, my heart, or whatever I had in that state, almost stopped. There, waiting for me, was a familiar figure I hadn't seen in years. My father was there, smiling at me with the same love and affection I remembered from my childhood. He looked younger than the last time I saw him, free of the marks of the disease that took him. His eyes sparkled with a vitality I barely remembered, and there was an aura of peace around him that was almost palpable. Without hesitation, I ran towards him, or at least I felt like running. We hugged for a long time, while tears of happiness ran down my face. It was as if all the weight I had been carrying since his death had been lifted from my shoulders in that instant. "My son," he said, his voice exactly as I remembered, "you have grown so much." We talked for what felt like both an instant and an eternity. Time there didn't work like it did on Earth. My father told me about his afterlife, about the wonders he had seen and learned about. He talked about how he had watched my mother and me, proud of how we had faced difficulties after his departure. Then his face became more serious. "Roldan," he said, "your mission on Earth is not yet over. You have an important purpose to fulfill." He showed me a vision of the future. I saw myself as a successful entrepreneur, expanding the family business he had started. I saw my mother, finally free from financial worries, living happily and running a flourishing flower shop. It was a bright future, full of hope and achievement. "For this future to come true," my father explained, "you need to come back. You need to take care of our family and face the challenges that lie ahead." I wanted to stay. I wish my mother was there with us, that we could be a family again. But my father, with his ever-present wisdom, explained to me that each of us has a mission on Earth, and that my mother's time had not yet come. "Remember, son," he said, placing his hand on my shoulder, "even if you can't see me, I will always be there, guiding you, protecting you. In the most difficult times, when you feel alone, know I'll be by your side." Your words filled me with courage and determination. I understood that, as difficult as it was to leave him again, I had important responsibilities in the world of the living. There were people who depended on me and a better future to build. My father hugged me one last time. "I'm proud of you, Roldan," he said. "Now go, and always remember the love that binds us even across the worlds." With a heart full of conflicting emotions, sadness at leaving him but hope for the future, I prepared to return. The last thing I saw was my father's confident smile, encouraging me to face what lay ahead. Before I could say anything else, I felt a force pulling me back. It was as if a giant rubber band, stretched to its maximum, had suddenly been released. The tunnel of light disappeared in the blink of an eye, and I was thrown back into physical reality with blinding speed. When I opened my eyes, the first thing I noticed was the constant beeping of machines. The smell of antiseptic filled my nostrils, and I felt the rough fabric of hospital sheets against my skin. I was back, in a hospital room. My vision was blurry at first, but I gradually focused on the environment around me. The white walls, the pale curtains, the medical equipment. It all seemed so normal. So different from the ethereal world I had just left. It was then that I noticed pressure in my left hand. Turning my head with difficulty, I saw my mother sitting next to the bed. She was holding my hand tightly, as if she feared I might disappear if she let go. His face was lined with worry and exhaustion, but his eyes shone with indescribable relief when he realized I had woken up. "Roldan," she exclaimed, her voice choked with emotion. "Thank God, my son. You came back to me." I wanted to talk, tell her everything that had happened, about the meeting with Dad, about the visions of the future. But my throat was dry, and all I could manage was a hoarse grunt. "Shh, don't try to talk now," my mother said softly, running her hand through my hair like she did when I was a child. "You need to rest. You've been through a lot." The days that followed were of slow recovery. Physically, I was weakened. The lightning had caused considerable damage to my body, and the doctors said it was a miracle that I survived. But while my body struggled to recover, my mind was clearer than ever. As soon as I could speak without difficulty, I told my mother about what had happened, about the out-of-body experience, the encounter with the devil and the angel, and most importantly, about my encounter with Dad. I told him about the message he had given me, about the future we had ahead of us. My mother cried when she heard my story. But they weren't just tears of sadness. There was also joy, relief, and most of all, hope. "I always knew your father was watching over us," she said, squeezing my hand. "Now we are sure that a better future awaits us." As I recovered, I began to notice changes in myself. My former skeptical view of the world had been completely transformed. Now I understood that there was more to life and death than I had ever imagined. I felt a deeper connection to the world around me, a heightened awareness of the invisible forces that surround us. But along with this new awareness also came a sense of responsibility. I had been given a second chance, a glimpse of the other side, and I knew I couldn't waste it. I had a mission to fulfill, a future to build. As I prepared to leave the hospital and face the outside world, I couldn't help but wonder what else fate had in store for me. Little did I know that my journey was just beginning, and that the toughest challenges were yet to come. The peace I hoped to find upon my return didn't last long. A few nights after returning home from the hospital, I began having vivid, disturbing nightmares. In these dreams, if I can call them that, dark entities visited me, trying to frighten me and silence the message of light that I had received. These creatures were different from the demon I encountered during my near-death experience. They were more subtle, more insidious. They appeared like shadows in the corners of the room, whispering threats and dark promises. Sometimes they took on almost human forms, but distorted and grotesque. One night, I woke up in a cold sweat. My heart was beating fast. I had just had a particularly intense dream. In it, one of these dark entities approached me and said, "Do you think you can change things? That you can make a difference? You have no idea the forces you are dealing with." I lay in bed, shaking, trying to understand what was happening. It was then that I realized these visits weren't just ordinary nightmares. They were real somehow. The entities were trying to reach me through my dreams, the time when I was most vulnerable. As the days went by, I began to notice patterns in these visits. The entities seemed stronger, more present when I thought about sharing my experience with others. It was as if they wanted to stop me from spreading the message I had received. Intrigued and scared, I started researching. I read books about near-death experiences, about the spiritual world, about hidden forces. It was during this research that I made a shocking discovery. The entities that visited me seemed to be linked to something much deeper and darker than I could have imagined. I discovered reports from other people who had had similar experiences, people who, after returning from near-death experiences, were haunted by dark forces. Most disturbingly, many of these people had connections to powerful people in their communities. I started putting the pieces together. The visions I saw, the threats from dark entities, the reports I encountered, everything pointed to one frightening conclusion. There were powerful people in Miami, and perhaps beyond, who practiced occult rituals to maintain their influence and power. And somehow, my near-death experience and the knowledge I had gained made me a threat to them. These dark forces seemed determined to destroy me, to silence the truth I had discovered. But at the same time, I felt the presence of the beings of light, the angels who protected me during my journey. They were there, invisible but present, guiding me and strengthening me. It was a constant struggle, an internal battle between fear and courage, between darkness and light. There were times when I almost gave up, times when the weight of what I had discovered seemed too great to bear. But then I remembered my father's words, the future he had shown me. It reminded me of my mother's strength, how she had faced so many difficulties without ever losing faith. And I found the strength to continue. My faith, a faith I didn't even know I had before this experience, became my shield against the forces of darkness. Each night before going to sleep, I prayed, asking for protection and guidance. And although the visits from the dark entities did not completely cease, I felt that I was growing stronger, more able to resist their influences. I knew the road ahead would be difficult, that I would face challenges I could never have imagined. But I also knew I wasn't alone in this battle. And with that certainty, I prepared to face whatever came next. As I delved deeper into the investigation into the entities that tormented me, I began to uncover something much bigger and scarier than I could have imagined. The pieces of the puzzle fell into place, revealing a chilling picture. I discovered that these entities were not just random manifestations of evil. They were part of a vast conspiracy involving some of the most powerful and influential people not only in Miami, but around the world. These people, connected through a network of occult sects, were using supernatural forces for their own selfish and evil ends. My research took me to ancient documents, obscure accounts, and testimonies from people who, like me, had glimpsed the other side. I found recurring patterns of dark rituals, pacts with evil entities, and manipulation of cosmic energies. Everything pointed to a bigger plan, something that could affect the balance of the entire world. It was then that I understood why my near-death experience was so threatening to them. I had returned with knowledge that could expose their plans. My survival and what I had learned made me a threat to their carefully orchestrated conspiracy. Among these powerful figures, one name began to stand out: Elias Romero. He was an influential businessman in Miami, known for his philanthropy and political connections. But behind this respectable facade, I discovered that Romero was actually the leader of one of the most powerful occult sects in the region. Romero had realized the danger I represented. He was the one who started using his resources and connections to try to silence me, sending these dark entities to attack and intimidate me. He knew that if I shared what I had seen and learned, his plans might fall apart. The more I investigated, the more dangerous the situation became. I realized that I was dealing with people who would not hesitate to use every means at their disposal, both mundane and supernatural, to protect their secrets. There were times when fear almost paralyzed me. The vastness of the conspiracy I had uncovered was overwhelming. How could I, a single person, face something so big and powerful? But then I remembered my experience, my father's love, the protection of beings of light. I remembered the future I was shown, a future of hope and light, and I understood that I could not remain silent. I had a responsibility not only to my family, but to all of humanity. I began documenting everything I discovered, creating a detailed record of my investigations. I kept this information in safe places with instructions that it would be released if something happened to me. It was my guarantee, my way of ensuring that the truth would come out no matter what happened to me. At the same time, I started looking for allies. I couldn't face this alone. I carefully shared parts of what I knew with people I trusted: investigative journalists, upstanding lawyers, even some politicians who seemed to be outside the conspiracy's influence. It was a period of constant tension. Every shadow seemed to hide a threat. Every look from strangers on the street could be someone watching my movements. But paradoxically, the deeper I delved into this dark world, the stronger my connection to the forces of good became. I realized that this battle went far beyond me. It was an ancient conflict between light and darkness, and somehow, I had become an important player in this cosmic game. The responsibility was daunting, but it also gave me a clear purpose. Despite the adversities, the threats, and the constant fear, I refused to be silenced. I knew my near-death experience had not been in vain. The message of light I received was more important than any threat or danger I could face. I began sharing my story, first with my mother and a few people I trusted completely. I saw how my story touched people, how it brought hope and comfort, especially to those who had lost loved ones. My mother, in particular, found new strength in my experience. His love and faith, which were already unshakable, seemed to have been renewed. She became my greatest ally, my safe haven in moments of doubt and fear. As my story spread, albeit in small, trusted circles, I began to receive messages from others who had gone through similar experiences. People who, like me, had glimpsed the other side and returned with a mission. We formed a discreet network of mutual support. We shared our experiences, strengthened each other, and together we began to spread a message of hope and protection. The beings of light that protected me during my journey were still present. I didn't see them like I used to, but I felt their presence, especially in the most difficult moments. It was as if an invisible hand was guiding me, giving me strength when I thought I could no longer continue. I began to understand that despite the power of the dark forces, there was something much bigger and more powerful watching over us. The message I received was clear: only with faith, courage, and unity could we resist the forces of evil that tried to dominate the world. Little by little, I saw how this message of hope was starting to make a difference. People who previously lived in fear and despair found a new reason to live. Communities grew stronger, united by a common purpose. Of course, the danger had not passed. Elias Romero and his allies remained a constant threat. But now I was no longer alone. Each person who embraced the message of hope became a beacon of light, lessening the power of darkness. I learned spiritual protection techniques, taught by those who, like me, had faced the forces of darkness. Meditation, prayers, purification rituals, they all became part of my daily routine. And with each day that passed, I felt stronger, more prepared to face whatever came. The battle was far from over, I knew that. But now, I was sure we were on the right path. Light always overcomes darkness, even if the process is long and difficult. Today, looking back at everything I've been through since that fateful day when I was struck by lightning, I see myself as a transformed man. The near-death experience wasn't just a glimpse of the afterlife. It was a calling, an awakening to a reality greater than I could have ever imagined. I learned the true value of life, family, and faith. My relationship with my mother has strengthened in ways I never thought possible. Together, we faced challenges that would have broken many others. Your strength and unwavering faith have become my daily inspiration. I became more mature, more aware of my purpose and the responsibility I carry. The hardships I have faced, both in the physical and spiritual worlds, have only strengthened my resolve to protect those I love and fight the forces that seek to destroy us. The skepticism that once defined my worldview has given way to a deeper, more complex understanding of reality. I have not abandoned reason or logic. In fact, they have become even more valuable tools in my search for truth. But now I know that there is more to the universe than can be explained by science alone. My work as a photographer gained a new dimension. Through my lens, I seek to capture not only visible reality, but also glimpses of the spiritual world that I now know surrounds us. Each photo became an opportunity to reveal the beauty and mystery that permeate our existence. The fight against Elias Romero and his network of conspirators continues. It's an uphill battle, often dangerous, but I know I'm not alone in it. Each day brings new allies, people who, touched by the message of hope, decide to join the cause of light. I know that the battle is not over yet, that it may never completely end in this life, but I'm prepared to face whatever comes. The beings of light, like my father, are by my side. Your presence is a constant reminder that no matter how dark the night seems, dawn will always come. My experience has taught me that each of us has an important role to play in this great cosmic drama. Every act of kindness, every word of hope, every gesture of love is a victory against darkness. And this is how, step by step, we build a better world. By sharing my story, I hope to inspire others to find the strength within themselves, to never give up, even in the face of the darkest adversity. Because in the end, that's what really matters. The love we share, the light we spread, and the difference we make in the lives of others. My journey continues, and I know there is still a lot to learn, a lot to face. But now I face the future not with fear, but with hope and determination. Because I know that no matter what, light always finds a way through the darkness. And so I end my story, but it is just the beginning of a new phase in my life. A phase of struggle, of discoveries, of growth. A phase in which every day is an opportunity to make a difference, to spread light and fight darkness. And I invite you, who have heard my story, to join me on this journey, because together, united by light and love, we can face any darkness that comes our way.